They say trust is the foundation of any strong relationship. I believe that. I live by it. I gave it to my wife, Lauren, without hesitation. But sometimes, trust isn't broken in one clean blow. It's chipped away, piece by piece, until one day, you're standing in the rubble of what you thought was unshakable. I met Lauren during my junior year at Florida State University. Back then, I was just a farm boy turned engineering student, working hard to make my family proud. Being the first to go to college was no small feat, and I carried the weight of that responsibility every day. Lauren, on the other hand, was polished, ambitious, and the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. She had this magnetism about her that made people want to be around her. She was chasing dual degrees in education and business administration, and her focus was razor sharp. But she wasn't unapproachable. Far from it. She had a way of making you feel like the only person in the world when she talked to you. We met during a group project for a political science class, something I'd taken as a required elective. Group projects usually meant one or two people did all the work while the rest coasted, but Lauren wasn't the type to let things slide. When she walked up to me, stuck out her hand, and introduced herself, I could barely stammer out my own name. "You sure about that?" she teased, her smile just enough to knock me off balance. That's how it started. I couldn't believe someone like her would even notice a guy like me. But she did, and over the months, we went from project partners to something more. Lauren wasn't impressed by grand gestures or expensive dates. A picnic in the park, a late-night walk, or even a quiet night watching TV was enough for her. We connected on a deeper level. At least I thought we did. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. We got married that summer and moved into a small but cozy house in a new development. At first, life was everything I could have hoped for. Lauren started working as a middle school teacher, and I landed a position at a mid-sized engineering firm. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. The house wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and it felt like the perfect place to build a future together. But comfort has a way of dulling your instincts. You start to overlook the small things, the little details that don't quite add up. That was my first mistake. I started to feel the strain in my career early on. As a junior engineer, I got the grunt work. Long hours, mind-numbing tasks, and no recognition. It wasn't what I'd envisioned when I picked this field. To distract myself, I started working toward a master's degree. I figured that with more qualifications, I'd finally get the assignments I wanted. Lauren was thriving, though. She moved from middle school to a high school guidance department, and she loved every second of it. She came home excited about her work, always eager to share stories about her day. I was proud of her, truly, but I couldn't help feeling like I was stuck in quicksand while she soared. Then, slowly, things started to shift. At first, it was the way she talked about her new boss, Marcus Taylor. Marcus was a former NFL player whose career had ended after a bad injury. He had a reputation for being charismatic, larger than life, and a natural leader. Lauren couldn't stop singing his praises. "Marcus is incredible," she'd say. "He has such big ideas for the school. He's going to change everything." At first, I shrugged it off. She was passionate about her work, and Marcus was just her boss. But then came the late nights, the emergency meetings, the way her phone never seemed to leave her side. One evening, I asked her point blank, "What's going on, Lauren? You're spending more time at work than at home." "It's just a busy season," she said without looking up from her phone. "We're planning the career assembly, and Marcus asked me to take the lead." Her tone was casual, dismissive, but something about the way she avoided eye contact didn't sit right with me. "Is that all it is?" I pressed, my voice firm. She finally looked up, annoyed. "What's that supposed to mean, Ethan?" "It means I'm not blind, Lauren," I shot back. "You're different. We're different. And I want to know why." She scoffed and walked out of the room, leaving me to stew in my frustration. That was the first time I let it go. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was just tired and projecting my own insecurities onto her. But deep down, I knew better. The cracks were small at first, but they were there. And cracks have a way of widening when you're not paying attention. I told myself to let it go, but letting things slide wasn't in my nature. The signs were there, like scratches on glass. Small enough to ignore at first, but impossible to unsee once noticed. I started paying attention, really paying attention, and the more I did, the less I liked what I saw. Lauren's late nights became a regular occurrence. Her explanations stayed the same: planning sessions, emergency meetings, last-minute school events. It was always work, and it wasn't just her schedule that changed. She started guarding her phone like it was a state secret, taking it with her everywhere, even into the bathroom. "Why do you suddenly need your phone 24/7? I asked one night, my frustration bubbling over. "It's work stuff," she said, barely looking at me. "Emails, updates. You wouldn't understand." The way she dismissed me lit a fire in my gut, but I didn't press her. Not yet. Then came the moment that tipped the scales. I was in the kitchen grabbing a beer when her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification popped up. "Thanks for tonight. Can't stop thinking about it." No name, just a number I didn't recognize. I froze, staring at the screen like it might bite me. My first instinct was to pick it up, to scroll through her messages and see exactly what tonight was. But before I could act, she walked in. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Your phone went off," I said, my voice steady but cold. "Something about tonight." Her face tightened, just for a second, but it was enough. "It's nothing," she said quickly, snatching the phone off the counter. "Work stuff, like I said." I didn't buy it for a second, but I wasn't going to fight her over it. Not yet. That was when I decided I needed proof. The next day, while she was at work, I started digging. Lauren and I shared a laptop, mostly for bills and emails, so I opened it up and started searching. At first, everything seemed normal. Emails from colleagues, scheduling updates, nothing unusual. But then I found a folder buried in her drive, labeled personal. Inside were screenshots of messages. Messages she'd saved. They weren't recent, but they told a story. Late-night conversations, flirty jokes, and compliments about how beautiful she looked. The name on the messages made my stomach drop. Marcus. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening with every word. I'd suspected, but seeing it in black and white made it real. That night, I didn't say anything. I needed more. 2 days later, my opportunity came. Lauren had a late meeting, so I decided to drop by the school unannounced. If she was planning the career assembly, like she said, there'd be nothing suspicious about me showing up to lend a hand. At least, that's what I told myself. When I got there, the parking lot was almost empty. I saw her car, parked near the back, but the school itself looked deserted. I walked in through the side entrance, the faint hum of fluorescent lights the only sound. "Lauren?" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty hallway. No response. I walked toward the gym, thinking maybe the meeting was being held there. But as I passed the main office, I heard voices. Her voice. And his. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see them inside. She was leaning against his desk, laughing at something he'd said. Marcus stood close, too close, his hand resting casually on the edge of the desk beside her. I didn't wait for more. I pushed the door open, the sudden noise cutting through their conversation like a knife. "Ethan?" Lauren's voice cracked with surprise. "What's going on here?" I asked, my tone sharp, my eyes darting between them. Marcus straightened up, his smile fading. "We're just going over plans for the assembly," he said smoothly. "Right," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "That's why you're both standing here like you're auditioning for a soap opera." Lauren's face flushed red, but she held her ground. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice firm. "Am I?" I shot back. "Then you won't mind if I sit in on this little planning session." Marcus cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "I think we're done for tonight," he said, stepping back. Lauren glared at him, but didn't argue. As he walked past me, I didn't move. I just stared him down until he looked away. When the door closed behind him, I turned to her. "What the hell is going on, Lauren?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "He's my boss, Ethan." "That's it. Don't lie to me." I snapped. "I've seen the messages. I know about the late-night texts. I know about tonight." Her eyes widened for a moment, but she recovered fast. "You've been snooping through my stuff?" "Don't turn this around on me," I said, stepping closer. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't see what's happening right in front of me?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, arms crossed, her jaw tight. "Here's the deal, Lauren," I said, my voice low and steady. "You want to ruin what we've built for a guy like him? Fine. But don't expect me to stand here and take it." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the empty office. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then. Another part wanted to go back and drag Marcus out of his fancy office and make him regret ever looking at my wife. But I knew neither of those options would solve anything. If Lauren wanted to betray me, I couldn't stop her. But I wasn't going to let her walk all over me either. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I wasn't going to sit around waiting for things to get worse. The cracks were no longer cracks. They were fractures wide and deep, and there was no going back. I didn't need to hear her excuses anymore. I didn't need to second-guess myself. That night at the office confirmed everything I had suspected, and I wasn't about to let Lauren or Marcus get away with it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just about their betrayal. It was about how I responded to it. I wasn't going to crumble or sit around playing the victim. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I'd make sure they both regretted it. My first stop was the lawyer's office. I'd scheduled a consultation after our confrontation at the school. The lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Stephanie Hall, listened carefully as I laid out my situation. "Let me make this clear," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Florida is a no-fault state. That means the affair itself won't have much bearing on the division of assets or alimony. But that doesn't mean you can't protect yourself. We'll focus on ensuring an equitable split while safeguarding your interests." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "I'm not looking for revenge in court," I said. "But I'm not about to let her walk away with everything, either." Stephanie's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Then let's get to work." After meeting with Stephanie, I started taking practical steps to separate my life from Lauren's. I opened a new bank account and moved half of the funds from our joint account into it. It wasn't an aggressive move, just enough to ensure she couldn't drain everything if she decided to go nuclear. Next, I began gathering documentation: pay stubs, account statements, mortgage papers. Stephanie had advised me to have everything ready before serving Lauren with divorce papers. It would make the process smoother, or at least less chaotic. Lauren, for her part, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She continued with her late nights and guarded phone calls, acting as though nothing had changed. Maybe she thought I'd accepted her excuses or that I was too spineless to do anything about it. Either way, she was wrong. The breaking point came a week later. Lauren had another meeting, and I decided to follow her. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know exactly how deep her lies went. She left the house around 7:30, wearing an outfit that wasn't exactly work-appropriate, a tight dress and heels she hadn't worn in years. I waited until she pulled out of the driveway before grabbing my keys and following her at a safe distance. She didn't go to the school. She didn't even go anywhere near it. Instead, she drove to a restaurant across town, a nice one, the kind we used to save for special occasions. I parked a few spots away and watched as she stepped inside. Less than a minute later, Marcus walked in, all smiles and confidence. They greeted each other like old lovers, his hand resting on her lower back as he guided her to a private booth. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to storm in there and flip their table. But I knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, I snapped a few photos with my phone, clear, undeniable proof of what they were doing. I waited outside until they left, watching as Marcus opened her car door like the gentleman he pretended to be. They didn't drive off together, but it didn't matter. I had what I needed. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee when Lauren came downstairs. She was her usual chipper self, acting as though she hadn't spent the night with another man. "Good morning," she said, grabbing a mug. I didn't respond. Instead, I slid my phone across the table, the screen displaying one of the photos I'd taken. Her face paled as she picked it up, her smile fading. "What's this?" "You tell me," I said, my voice cold. For a moment, she was silent. Then she put the phone down and crossed her arms. "Were you following me?" "You're damn right I was," I shot back. "And don't try to turn this around on me, Lauren. I know what you're doing. I've known for weeks." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Save it. I'm not interested in your excuses. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I'm filing for divorce." You can stay here until the papers are signed, but after that, we're done." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of anger. "You're really going to throw away everything we've built over a few pictures?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You threw it away, Lauren? The moment you decided I wasn't enough for you." She didn't say anything after that. She just turned and walked out of the room, leaving her coffee untouched. In the days that followed, I focused on moving forward. I found a small apartment across town and started packing up my things. I wasn't going to let her dictate the terms of our separation. Lauren tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was avoiding me as much as possible, staying out late and keeping her distance when she was home. Part of me wondered if she thought Marcus would leave his wife for her. If that was the case, she was in for a rude awakening. Then something unexpected happened. I got a call from Naomi, Marcus's wife. She found my number through a mutual acquaintance and wanted to meet. When we sat down at a coffee shop, she looked just as tired and frustrated as I felt. "I think we're in the same boat," she said, her voice low. "I've been suspicious for a while, but I couldn't prove anything. Then I found these." She slid a folder across the table, filled with screenshots of messages between Lauren and Marcus. They weren't just flirty. They were explicit, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "I'm filing for divorce," Naomi said, her jaw set. "And I want you to know that Marcus isn't going to get away with this. Not with me, and not with you." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone in this. Together, Naomi and I started piecing together a plan, not just to protect ourselves, but to make sure Lauren and Marcus faced the consequences of their actions. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about taking back control, and I wasn't going to let them win. Naomi and I quickly discovered we were dealing with two people who didn't care whose lives they wrecked. Lauren and Marcus weren't just sneaky, they were smug. Smugness can make even betrayal worse, because it's like they think they're invincible, that the rest of us are too blind to notice or too weak to do anything about it. That arrogance was going to make what came next all the sweeter. It started with Naomi and me comparing notes. The photos I'd taken of Lauren and Marcus at the restaurant were just the tip of the iceberg. Naomi had been digging, too, and she had plenty to share. Emails, meeting records, and even some shady receipts that hinted Marcus was using school funds for their private escapades. We were holding dynamite, and we both knew it. "This isn't just about the affair anymore," Naomi said as we sat at her dining room table one evening. "This is about accountability. If we don't expose them, who will?" I nodded, feeling the same fire she did. "They think they're untouchable. Let's prove them wrong." The first thing I did was confront Lauren. Again, the last time we spoke, she had acted like the affair was nothing but an annoyance for me to deal with, something I should just get over. This time, I wasn't coming with suspicions. I was armed with facts. That night, she came home from one of her so-called late meetings, phone in hand as usual. "Ethan," she said, her voice too casual, "we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair at the kitchen table, crossing my arms. "Sure. Let's talk about how you've been embezzling time and energy from our marriage to play secretary for Marcus." Her face froze, her eyes narrowing. "Do you have to keep bringing this up? We're getting divorced. Isn't that enough for you?" "Not nearly." I shot back, standing up and grabbing the folder I'd prepared. "You think this is just about you cheating? Think again. Naomi and I have been doing some digging. Turns out you and Marcus have been a lot busier than I realized." Her confident mask cracked. "What are you talking about?" I slapped the folder down on the counter, watching as she hesitated before picking it up. Inside were copies of emails between her and Marcus, invoices for hotel stays, and an expense report showing that Marcus had used district funds for a romantic getaway. "This," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "You think no one's paying attention? Or do you just assume everyone's as dumb as Marcus makes you feel special?" Her hands trembled as she looked through the documents, her face pale. "Ethan, Save it," I interrupted, stepping closer. "I don't care about your excuses. What I care about is making sure you and Marcus get exactly what you deserve. And trust me, Lauren, you will." She glared at me, anger flashing in her eyes. "You're such a vindictive bastard," she spat. "Maybe," I said with a shrug. "But at least I'm not a liar or a cheat." She didn't say another word. She just slammed the folder shut and walked out of the room. Naomi and I decided to target Marcus's professional life first. His reputation was the cornerstone of his success, and we had the means to shatter it. We compiled all the evidence, emails, photos, receipts, and sent it anonymously to several members of the school board. The fallout was immediate. Within days, an internal investigation was launched into Marcus's conduct. The rumors started flying. Misappropriation of funds, unethical relationships with staff, even whispers of favoritism in hiring. Lauren, meanwhile, was unraveling under the pressure. She stopped coming home at her usual times, and when she did, she avoided me completely. She must have known I was behind the investigation, but she didn't have the nerve to confront me about it. One night, though, she snapped. She came home late, slamming the door behind her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she shouted, her face flushed with anger. I didn't even look up from the TV. "Enlighten me." "You've ruined his career," she yelled. "The board is investigating him, Ethan. This is going to destroy him." "Good," I said simply, leaning back in my chair. "He deserves it. And so do you." She stared at me, her chest heaving, her jaw clenched. "You're a bitter, vindictive piece of work," she hissed. "Maybe," I said, standing up and walking past her. "But at least I'm not a fool who thought Marcus was my ticket to happiness." The school board's investigation uncovered more than Naomi and I could have imagined. Marcus hadn't just been using district funds for personal trips. He'd been manipulating budgets, falsifying reports, and even skimming money from extracurricular programs. His suspension was announced less than a month later. He was removed from his position as principal, and the district made it clear that criminal charges were on the table if the allegations were confirmed. Lauren wasn't named publicly, but her reputation took a hit among her colleagues. She stopped talking about work altogether, and the once proud, ambitious woman I'd married seemed to shrink under the weight of her choices. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, but the truth was the whole thing left me hollow. The marriage I thought I had, the woman I thought I loved, they were gone. And every reminder of Lauren felt like a reminder of my own failure to see her for what she truly was. One night, Naomi called me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought this would feel better." "It doesn't," she said. "Not right away, but it will." Naomi had been through her share of betrayal, too. We'd become allies in this mess, leaning on each other for support. She was right. Revenge didn't heal wounds, but it was a step toward closure. A few weeks later, I moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with a view of the parking lot. But it was mine. Lauren and I hadn't spoken much since the divorce papers were filed, and I preferred it that way. While unpacking, I came across an old photo of us from our first year of marriage. We were smiling, holding hands, looking at each other like we were the only two people in the world. I stared at it for a long time before finally tossing it into the trash. That part of my life was over. But as much as I wanted to leave it all behind, there was one more thing I needed to do. I wasn't going to let Lauren or Marcus dictate the narrative of my life. I was going to write my own ending to this chapter, one that didn't revolve around their betrayal. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, and for the first time in months, I felt ready to move forward. After moving into my apartment, I focused on rebuilding my life. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, not over Lauren, Marcus, or the mess they'd made, but over myself. I was done reacting. It was time to act deliberately. The divorce proceedings with Lauren dragged on, as I'd expected. She tried to play the victim, arguing that she deserved more because of the emotional stress I'd caused by exposing the affair. I didn't budge. My lawyer, Stephanie, made sure we were well prepared. "We have everything we need to push back," Stephanie told me in one of our meetings. "The courts won't care about emotional theatrics. It's about facts, and the facts are on your side." It wasn't just the divorce that kept me busy. Naomi and I continued working together, ensuring that Marcus faced the consequences of his actions. We couldn't control the school board's final decision, but we could make sure they had all the information they needed to see Marcus for who he really was. A month later, the school board announced its decision. Marcus was terminated from his position as principal. They cited gross misconduct, misuse of funds, and ethical violations. It was a public disgrace, and it made local headlines. I watched the news that evening, the satisfaction muted by the realization of how far things had fallen. I wasn't the only one who had lost something. Naomi and her daughter were trying to rebuild their lives too. And from what I could see, Marcus wasn't going to make it easy for them. Naomi called me the next day. "He's fighting me on everything," she said, her voice heavy with frustration. "He's dragging out the divorce, claiming he doesn't have the money to pay child support. Meanwhile, he's living in a condo downtown and driving a new car." I clenched my jaw, anger flaring up. "He's a coward," I said. "He's always been a coward. But we'll make sure he doesn't get away with it." One evening, Naomi invited me over for dinner. It had been weeks since we'd sat down together, and I could tell she needed someone to talk to. As we ate, she opened up about the toll the divorce was taking. "I keep asking myself how I didn't see it sooner," she said, her eyes distant. "How I let him fool me for so long." "You're not the only one," I said. "Lauren had me fooled too. They're good at pretending, at making you believe there's something they're not." Naomi nodded, her expression softening. "At least now we know the truth, and we're not alone in this." As the weeks passed, I began to find small moments of peace. I threw myself into work, picking up extra projects and finding satisfaction in what I could accomplish on my own. I also started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't just about staying fit. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that I'd lost during my marriage. Naomi and I stayed in touch, meeting occasionally to share updates about our respective divorces. Over time, our conversations shifted from strategy sessions to something more personal. We talked about our lives before the chaos, about our dreams and the futures we were trying to rebuild. One evening, she invited me to join her and her daughter for a trip to the zoo. It was a simple outing, but it felt significant. Watching her with her little girl, seeing the way she poured her love and energy into being a mother, made me realize how strong she was. As we sat on a bench, watching her daughter feed the giraffes, Naomi turned to me and said, "You know, this is the first time in a long time that I've felt normal, like things might actually be okay." I smiled, nodding. "Yeah, me too." But not everything was peaceful. Marcus wasn't going down without a fight. He continued to drag out his divorce, filing motion after motion to delay the proceedings. Naomi's lawyer was relentless, but Marcus was clearly trying to wear her down. "He thinks if he makes this hard enough, I'll just give up," Naomi said during one of our phone calls. "But I won't. Not when it comes to my daughter." "You're stronger than he is," I told her. "And he knows it. That's why he's playing these games, because it's all he's got left." A few months later, the divorce with Lauren was finally finalized. It was a relief to have that chapter closed, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a long, exhausting battle. Lauren moved out of the house, and I made the decision to sell it. It was too full of memories, both good and bad, to feel like a fresh start. The money from the sale allowed me to pay off some lingering debts and set aside a little cushion for the future. Around the same time, Naomi's divorce reached a critical point. Marcus had been ordered to disclose his financial records, and the results were damning. He'd hidden assets in offshore accounts and lied about his income to avoid paying child support. The court didn't take kindly to his deceit. Not only was he ordered to pay back what he owed, but his attempts to manipulate the system cost him any chance of retaining custody. Naomi was granted full custody of her daughter, along with a significant financial settlement. The day Naomi's divorce was finalized, we went out to celebrate. It wasn't anything fancy, just dinner at a quiet restaurant. But it felt like a weight had been lifted off both of our shoulders. "To moving forward," I said, raising my glass. "To finally being free," Naomi replied, clinking her glass against mine. As the evening went on, I found myself looking at her differently. She wasn't just an ally in this fight. She was someone who had stood by me when I needed support the most, someone who understood my pain because she'd lived through it too. When I walked her to her car that night, I hesitated for a moment before leaning in and kissing her. It wasn't planned, but it felt right. She smiled, her cheeks flushing slightly. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice soft. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" I asked, a hint of a smile tugging at my lips. "Good," she said, nodding. "Definitely good." From that moment on, things began to change. Naomi and I started spending more time together, not just as friends, but as something more. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was natural, the kind of connection that comes from shared experiences and mutual respect. Her daughter, too, became a bright spot in my life. She was full of energy and curiosity, a reminder of the innocence and joy that still existed in the world. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her daughter climbed onto my lap and asked, "Are you going to stay for dinner again?" I glanced at Naomi, who was smiling softly. "I'd like that," I said. As the months passed, Naomi and I built something that felt real and solid. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about creating a future that wasn't defined by it. The road hadn't been easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Naomi and I were finding our rhythm, building a life together slowly but deliberately. The chaos Marcus and Lauren had caused was behind us, and the peace that came with that was something I hadn't known in years. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One Saturday morning, Naomi and I were at the park with her daughter, Olivia. The air was crisp, the kind of day that makes you feel alive. Olivia was running ahead, chasing after a squirrel, her laughter echoing through the trees. Naomi leaned against me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "I can't believe how normal this feels," she said, smiling. "After everything we've been through, I didn't think this kind of peace was possible." "Normal is underrated," I replied, returning her smile. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from work or a reminder for some bill I'd forgotten to pay. Instead, it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Ethan, we need to talk. Call me. It's about Marcus." The message froze me in place. I stared at it, trying to piece together why someone would contact me about Marcus now. Naomi noticed my shift in mood immediately. "What is it?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I showed her the message. She sighed, her hand tightening slightly around mine. "It's probably nothing," she said, though her voice held a trace of unease. "Just ignore it." I wanted to take her advice, but something about the message felt urgent. I excused myself and stepped a few paces away, dialing the number. The man on the other end introduced himself as an investigator. "I've been looking into Marcus Taylor," he said, "and your name came up in connection to the school board investigation." "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "The fallout from the investigation has led to more allegations," he continued. "Specifically, financial fraud that extends beyond the school. It looks like Marcus was using shell accounts to funnel money, and some of it connects to the divorce proceedings with his wife. I thought you'd want to know since you were involved in exposing him." My grip tightened on the phone. "Are you saying he's under criminal investigation?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," the man confirmed. "I'm reaching out because we might need a statement from you about what you discovered." I glanced back at Naomi and Olivia, who were playing with a frisbee now. My chest tightened at the thought of dragging this nightmare back into our lives. "If you need me, I'll cooperate," I said finally. "But I want this done as quickly as possible." When I told Naomi about the call later that evening, she nodded solemnly. "I had a feeling something like this might happen," she admitted. "Marcus was always reckless, especially when it came to money." Her tone was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We don't let it consume us," she said firmly. "Let them deal with him. He's not our problem anymore." But Marcus had a way of making himself everyone's problem. A few days later, Naomi called me in a panic. "He showed up at my house," she said, her voice shaking. "He was banging on the door, yelling about how I ruined his life." "Is Olivia okay?" I asked, my heart racing. "She wasn't home, thank God," Naomi said. "But Ethan, he's losing it. I had to call the police to get him to leave." I clenched my jaw, fury coursing through me. "That's it," I said. "He doesn't get to terrorize you like this." "I'll handle it," Naomi protested, but I was already putting on my jacket. When I got to Marcus's condo, I wasn't sure what I was planning to do. Confront him? Threaten him? Maybe. But when he opened the door, he looked worse than I'd ever seen him. He was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot, and his once pristine condo was a mess. Bottles and takeout containers were strewn everywhere, a stark contrast to the image of perfection he'd always tried to project. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice slurred. To tell you to stay the hell away from Naomi, I said, my voice cold. If you come near her or Olivia again, I'll make sure you regret it. He laughed bitterly, leaning against the doorframe. You think you're better than me? You're just a rebound for her. You know that, right? Say whatever you want, I said, stepping closer. But understand this, you're done. Your career, your reputation, it's over. And if you keep pushing, I'll make sure you lose what little you have left. Marcus stared at me for a long moment before slamming the door in my face. The incident rattled me more than I wanted to admit. But I kept my promise to Naomi. I wouldn't let Marcus's unraveling pull us back into his chaos. Over the next few weeks, the investigation into his finances deepened. Naomi and I provided statements about what we'd uncovered. But for the most part, we stayed on the sidelines. Marcus was his own worst enemy, and it wasn't long before the authorities closed in. The final blow came when Marcus was arrested for embezzlement. Seeing his mugshot on the news was surreal. He looked nothing like the polished, confident man Lauren had left me for. Instead, he was haggard, defeated, a cautionary tale of arrogance and greed. Lauren's reaction was predictably dramatic. She called me out of the blue, crying about how Marcus had lied to her and dragged her into his mess. You picked him, I said simply, cutting her off mid-sentence. Whatever happens now is your problem, not mine. With Marcus out of the picture, things started to settle down. Naomi and I focused on building a life together, one step at a time. We weren't in a rush, but every moment we spent together felt like progress. One evening, we took Olivia out for ice cream. She was sitting across from us, her face smeared with chocolate, when she suddenly looked up and said, I like when you're here, Ethan. You make Mommy happy. I glanced at Naomi, who was smiling softly. In that moment, I realized how much my life had changed. I'd gone from feeling betrayed and broken to finding something real, something worth holding on to. It wasn't the ending I'd planned, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes the best things come from the unexpected. With Marcus finally out of our lives, Naomi and I found a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. The chaos, the anger, and the constant stress of dealing with Lauren and Marcus were behind us. What remained was a simple truth. We had both survived the worst and come out stronger. Naomi's home became a place of comfort for me. Her daughter, Olivia, had grown attached to me in a way I hadn't expected. Her innocent questions and bright laughter were a reminder that life could be joyful, even after everything we'd endured. One evening, as we all sat on the couch watching a movie, Olivia crawled into my lap and asked, Ethan, are you going to stay with us forever? Her question caught me off guard. I glanced at Naomi, who smiled warmly, her eyes filled with encouragement. If your mom wants me to, then yes, I said, gently brushing a strand of hair from Olivia's face. I do, Naomi said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. The months that followed were filled with small but meaningful milestones. Naomi and I officially moved in together, combining our lives in a way that felt seamless. The home we created wasn't just a refuge. It was a new beginning. Lauren, on the other hand, had faded into the background. Her life had fallen apart after Marcus's arrest, and she moved back to her hometown to escape the whispers and judgment. I didn't hear from her, and I didn't care to. One day, while sorting through some old boxes, I came across a stack of photos from my marriage to Lauren. For a moment, I considered keeping them, holding on to some shred of what we'd once had. But as I flipped through the images, all I could see was the distance between us, the cracks that had been there long before Marcus came into the picture. I threw the photos into the trash without a second thought. Naomi and I found joy in the little things. Quiet dinners at home, weekend trips to the park, and lazy mornings with Olivia bouncing between us on the bed. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Naomi turned to me and said, Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't met? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. I try not to, I said honestly, because no matter how much pain it took to get here, I wouldn't trade this for anything. She reached for my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Me neither. Life wasn't perfect. No life ever is, but it was ours. We didn't just rebuild after the betrayal. We created something better. Naomi's strength, Olivia's laughter, and the love we shared were proof that even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for something good. As I sat with Naomi and Olivia, watching them laugh over a silly joke, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. The pain, the anger, and the betrayal were all behind me. What lay ahead was a future I never saw coming, but one I was endlessly grateful for. Sometimes, life doesn't go the way you planned. But if you're lucky, it can take you somewhere even better.